Okay, on today's video I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to give you my top 5 tips on how to develop your own style, your own voice as an artist. Now I think there's a lot of people out there that perhaps have developed the basic skills in order to produce something that looks pretty good. Have artists that they like, but they find that when they're producing a piece of work it's a little bit too derivative. It perhaps resembles the paintings, the individual pieces of work that they like a little bit too much, and they find themselves just copying other people. So I'm going to give you some of my basic ideas upon reflection upon many years of producing my own work, my top 5 tips on how to get you to a place where you're actually being original and more authentic to what your own taste and imagination actually is. Okay, so number 1 on my list of top tips is develop your own taste, know what you like. Now nobody else can tell you what your personal taste is and what you should like. Anybody that tries, you need to resist. In my time at art college and just generally in life, there's plenty of people that are quite vocal about what it is they like. But honestly, I think that you need to maintain your own sense of taste, your own likes and your own dislikes, and be truthful and authentic to what it is that you're genuinely interested in. I think only through that will your sort of inner imagination, inner voice grow strong. For example, when any artist goes to art college, you'll be told that you shouldn't like the work of Salvador Dali because I guess it's a kind of entry point for a lot of people that aren't hugely knowledgeable about surrealists or different art movements, might be familiar with the work of Dali because his work has been extremely popular. And so there's a certain kind of snobbery around certain arts, certain aesthetic styles that people will tell you that you shouldn't be interested in these things. Especially at art college, it's really quite snobby at times. Now, I would certainly say that you need to make sure that you see lots of examples of different kind of artists and don't stick with the first one that you like and as your only influence. But I don't think you should discount an artist that you find inspiring just because other people tell you not to find it interesting. So I'm just going to give you a rundown of some of the artists that I've found interesting over the years personally and has really helped go towards developing my own personal style. Salvador Dali is kind of vaguely one of them. But I'm just using that as an example because I think it's one that is frowned upon in art education, and I don't think that's a right method at all. If you're genuinely interested in this kind of image and the work of Dali, then run with it. Don't talk yourself out of being interested in something just because of somebody else's opinion. But in terms of my main influences, now the work of Turner, an English painter, not exactly what the kind of work I produce, but it's there in the mix. And this is the important thing. When you find artists that you find inspiring, there'll be something about their work that perhaps you find inspiring. Now, it could be the use of colour, it could be the kind of textural quality of their work, or it could be their bold use of composition and drama in the scene. Whatever it is okay. Whatever element of their work you take inspiration from that inspires you and makes you think, wow. So this is an artist that I particularly have loved. I've always enjoyed going to see his work firsthand. Not really the kind of image that I produce, but still one of my major influences. An artist that really has been, especially in my teenage years, a massive influence on me is the work of H.R. Giger. His sort of biomechanical, sci-fi, surreal kind of artwork has really been a huge influence on my work. I've never sought to copy his style, but it's definitely had a big impact on me and has inspired and sparked my imagination off. So whether it be kind of landscapes that are really quite surreal, the twisting of natural elements to make them, mixed with human body, these have definitely got into my psyche from an early age, really, from my early teenage years. And it's not been necessary to try and copy his work, it's kind of come out in the mix. Now, another major influence on me has been the kind of visual style of Star Wars, and I'm talking back from the original Star Wars movies predominantly. But even the most recent, the prequels and the newest ones have kind of inspired me artistically. And there's certainly a little bit of snobbery around sci-fi and really big, huge sci-fi kind of titles, and to take influence from those it's probably frowned upon within art college, but personally I've never cared about that. I think if it inspired you, whatever element of it that you find really awakens your imagination, then it's important for you. I mean, I discovered really digital artwork by looking at this back in the maybe 2002, I think it was, around that point. I didn't really have much knowledge of digital painting at that point, but looking through the Art of Star Wars book at that point for Attack of the Clones, which I happen to think is the weakest of the Star Wars films, but still, looking through the art of Star Wars in this book, I discovered by looking at the credits and that it was actually a digital painting, which kind of blew my mind at the time, looking at the visual style of it and the effects of light and colour and the richness of it. It just really inspired me. to want to explore that type of artwork. Not necessarily in subject matter, but the possibilities, the potential of the medium more than anything. Okay, tip number 2, don't copy an artist's work, but emulate what it is that they did in order to arrive at their particular style. So, what I mean by that, if you look at the work of Turner, you could get a canvas, a piece of paper, and you could literally try and copy his images to try and unlock the secrets of how he did things. But what you'd find yourself doing is copying his work, literally. So I don't think that's necessarily the best way to unlock your own voice, your own imagination. What I would say is that think about the way that the artist has actually developed their particular style. Now, if we take Turner as an example, then obviously he would be sat out in the landscape, he would be sketching, he would be painting, he would be observing the natural phenomena, the sky, the sun, water, all the elements that he's actually showing in his artwork is what he was out there studying. So if you want to become more like Turner, and it is the natural elements that you find inspiring in his work, then I would recommend that you go out there just like he did and subject yourself, expose yourself to the same kind of stimulus that he was looking at. So whether that means you sat out in the landscape sketching and painting like he was, or whether you're out there photographing, or even if you're just doing a Google search of different examples of different skies and different subject matter. It's better if you go out in person and sketch and observe things in the real world, but I would say it's better to go to the source of inspiration, not stick at one particular artist's interpretation of it. Now, looking at the work of H.R. Giger, I found his artwork particularly inspiring, so I looked at it and I tried to unlock what the secrets were to actually understanding how to produce work like that. And one of the things that jumped out as being fairly obvious, and it was a thing that I liked about his work, was the kind of skeletal forms in it. The vertebrae and the designs, the repeating patterns. So I took that as my inspiration and I went out and I developed my own understanding of anatomy, of drawing skeletons, and it became a bit of an obsession of repetitive shapes. So just to recap, I would say that it's better to avoid copying the actual artist's images. Don't try and recreate what they specifically did. Maybe try and recreate their method. So if they're someone who's looked at a particular subject matter and it's that about their work that you find interesting rather than their technique, then go to the same subject matter. Maybe something similar might send you on an offshoot. So it might start at something similar to them, but then you might go off at a tangent and end up in a different subject matter. And that's when you start to develop more of your own voice. Okay, so step 3 is very much overlapped with step 2. In terms of going out there and studying the subject matter that interests you, you need to put in the groundwork. Once you know what it is that interests you, you need to go out there and you need to expose yourself to it. You need to really understand how it works. Now, I've always been interested in trees. These are really early studies. They're really old. But I would sit out there. They weren't studied from photographs. They were at a time where digital photography didn't exist. It was all developed film. So I wouldn't waste money and time waiting for photographs to develop. I would go out there and I would sketch. And I think there's something special about drawing from life anyway. But I think it's really important to put in the hours. There's no escape from this. If you want to become good and develop your own visual style, I think putting in the hours and studying the material, studying the subject matter is a crucial step. Now, none of these tips are going to give you an overnight solution to having your own style and ability. They're the things that you're going to have to put a lot of time and effort in order to really develop and grow strong in these areas. So one of the areas I was really interested in was trees. So I'd spend hours sat out in the natural environment actually studying specific trees. Another thing that I would draw would be the human anatomy and skeletons, as mentioned in tip 2. And this has probably been the most inspiring thing to study for me personally. I would return to the skeleton form many times. And I feel even now, even having studied it many times, there's still things that I keep discovering, little details within the skeleton structure, just of the human skeleton, that I find endlessly interesting. And obviously we've got other animals and other skeletal forms that add other layers of interest. So I honestly feel it's something that I will continue to draw and to continue to observe in the future as well. Okay, tip number 4, and a really crucial one, a really important one I feel, is to doodle. Now I guess in essence doodling is just playing. It's drawing without any a conception, without any real knowledge of what it is you're going to produce. It's just the act of playing with the materials. And I think that in any particular area, that I think that the act of playing is really, really crucial for learning. Now, when it comes to doodling, I knew I had certain interests. I had skeleton forms, I had trees, I had all these things in the mix that I've studied, which is why step or tip 3 is really important, because when you come to doodle and just see what comes out of your mind onto the page, then those influences, those things that you've looked at will start to spill out. Now, this was the very first sketchbook that I started with the deliberate intent to just doodle. Now, I arrived at the point of view where I knew I had things in my mind's eye that I was kind of interested in, but I didn't quite have a visual language of my own. I didn't know quite how to produce it into the types of drawings and paintings that I wanted. And it was there on my mind's eye, but I couldn't quite interpret that onto the page. So I feel it's a really crucial stage to just spend time with the page, spend time with the pencil, and just start to see what kind of shapes that you gravitate towards the most. If you find that you're having certain types of shapes and forms that interest you again and again and again and again, then they're going to be the things that start to define you as an artist. Now, these are the extremely crude and very, very simple studies or doodles that I began with. And as you can see here, I've got many sketchbooks, and there's all sorts of doodles that are all over the place over the years. But as I went through, I would only spend sort of 20 minutes, half an hour on each one perhaps to begin with. But page after page after page after page, I found that I started to gravitate more and more towards particular shapes and ideas. And over time, they started to develop, get more complicated, and I became more satisfied with them. Initially, there's no way that something like this was really going to produce a finished piece of work. I mean, if it was to present this as an artist, this isn't something that I would be pleased with. But it isn't about a finished piece of work, it's about the process. Spend the time developing, not worrying about the finished outcome. It's not about a finished piece. Get a sketchbook, it's scruffy, it's something that's going to be, thrown in your bag, thrown around the house, picked up whenever you're going to have a little bit of time just to doodle, to experiment. Don't be too precious about it. This isn't a finished piece of work. This is a process where you're developing. This is like going to the gym, not running a race. You put in the groundwork, you spend the time, and you will get stronger at that particular discipline. Now, over many sketchbooks and over a lot of time, then I started to get better at these shapes. I would say they became more complicated, more complex, to the point where some of the forms began to make their way into actual paintings in the end. Looking at almost all of these now, these are definitely not the kind of shapes that I would want to include. My aesthetic, my understanding of form, my taste of particular shapes has advanced since this point. Now, if I can compare it to one of my most recent doodles, or it's not a doodle at this point because they've developed in sophistication enough to actually form the basis for a finished piece. But you can see that the level of sophistication has gone up. And that's what happens over time, is that you start with a discipline, you start quite basic. I mean, certainly if I compare the first page of the first sketchbook where I was practicing this discipline, it's come a long way since then. And that is what is going to happen if you start to doodle and play around with shapes and textures and forms and lines. And it wouldn't look like this necessarily. I'm not saying that your results would bear any resemblance to my style or my work, but whatever it ends up as, whatever you gravitate towards, is what you are most interested in, and it's going to be informed by what you've looked at. And you keep investing in it, keep developing it, it will get more and more focused, more fine-tuned to what it is you are particularly interested in. Okay, tip number 5, I would say, is to experiment and try different things. Now, there's different ways to experiment. If you're talking about just the manipulation of form, the kind of line work that you're interested in, then one of the things that, for example, I've done as an artist, I used to produce lots of things inspired by skeletons and trees, and I did have an interest in more sci-fi kind of forms, more mechanical looking things, but it's something that I'd never managed to do into my work. And so I set myself the challenge of experimenting with just geometric shapes, lots of straight lines, tried to make it look mechanical, just man-made, and I did page after page of mechanical looking forms. Now, I spent a good few months doing these, and it did result in a few finished pieces as well. But obviously you may not be a drawer predominantly, you might be a photographer. Now it's important, to perhaps consider all the different disciplines, from photography to sculpture to painting to printmaking, whatever the discipline is. You don't necessarily know at the start. You may start sketching just because it's the medium that most people start with, but you might end up in a totally different place. Now, I've enjoyed doing photography, lots of studying from life. Again, subject matter, not skeleton forms in this example, but you can see the repetition of shape that has clearly inspired me, and similar again. I've done full paintings. This particular piece is sold, so I don't own it anymore. But this was acrylic on canvas. Again, this was oil on canvas, another fire study. Sculpture is something that I've experimented with too. This is something I did at college when I was about 17. Playing around with the 3D matter is something that I found personally really informative, really inspiring for when I was doing drawing too. And this is an example of a print I did at college. I did a printmaking course. So obviously it's inspired the skeleton form interpreted into printmaking. And obviously anyone that's familiar with my channel now knows that this is the kind of painting that I do. Digital format, digital technology on the iPad. And so it's developed, it starts with very traditional mediums. You may experiment in 3D things, but where you end up is not necessarily where you begin. But it's important perhaps to try your hand at all sorts of different disciplines, different ways of working, and then eventually you'll probably arrive at the kind of thing that suits you the best. Not that you have to streamline and specialize in just one area, but the experience, the understanding of how different disciplines work, all can feed into each other, and you'll find what it is that you enjoy the most. So that accounts for my top 5 tips. I'm going to give you one extra one, which kind of links to the first tip, in all honesty, but I think it's a very important one, and that is just to re-emphasize that you should not be told what to like. I think there's lots of people out there that are very opinionated and will tell you that you should like something over another, and I do feel that if you arrive at a style that you're invested in and that you enjoy doing after years of experimentation and investing in it, and somebody comes along and doesn't like it and criticizes you for it, it does not mean that therefore it is not worthwhile and you shouldn't stick with it. I found that myself through going through art college, university, there's always going to be people that don't appreciate what it is you do, that don't find what you do inspiring and feel that you should be doing something else, and that is fine, they're entitled to that. But as my additional bonus tip, like I say, it links to tip 1, is just don't be told what to like. You need to use your own opinion, your own judgment, and be authentic to your own opinion. Okay, so they're my top 5 tips. I hope they've been useful. Normally I do kind of tutorial based videos, how to draw landscapes, different types of things. So if you're not already subscribed, make sure to press the bell button next on the subscribe button. Check out the link in my description if you want to support me on Patreon, and I shall catch you back here again. See you later.